My brother secretly changed my locks and claimed squatters' rights in my house, so I shut off his utilities and had him arrested. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am at 2 a.m., adrenaline still pumping after what just went down in my own home. I'm James, 31M, and what I'm about to tell you is how my older brother Michael, 33M, tried to pull the most audacious scam I've ever witnessed, attempting to establish squatters' rights in my basement. But he severely underestimated who he was dealing with. Let me paint you the full picture, because context matters here. I bought my house 3 years ago after working my ass off in tech consulting. It's nothing fancy, a modest 3-bedroom split-level in suburban Ohio, but it's mine. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement has come from my pocket. The basement is finished, complete with its own bathroom, kitchenette, and separate entrance. I'd originally planned to rent it out for extra income but never got around to it. Michael, on the other hand, has spent the last decade bouncing between our parents' house, various girlfriends' apartments, and the occasional couch surf with friends. He's always had excuses: the economy, bad bosses, unfair landlords. Our parents, Patricia and Robert, have enabled him every step of the way. Family helps family, Mom would say while slipping him another check. 6 weeks ago, Michael showed up at my door with 2 duffel bags and his signature hangdog expression. His latest girlfriend, Jennifer, had kicked him out after catching him borrowing money from her purse one too many times. He needed a place to crash, just for a few days, while he figured things out. Against my better judgment, I let him stay in the basement. No formal agreement, no rent discussion, just helping out my brother. The first week was fine. He kept to himself, seemed to be job hunting. The second week, I noticed he'd moved in more belongings. By week 3, he'd set up his gaming system, hung posters, and was receiving mail at my address. When I confronted him about his timeline for leaving, he laughed it off. Relax, little brother. I'm not hurting anyone being down here. Week 4 is when things got interesting. I came home from a business trip to find he'd changed the lock on the basement's separate entrance. When I demanded an explanation, he handed me a printed document, some garbage he'd found online about tenant rights and establishing residency. He actually said, with a straight face, "I've been here over 30 days. I have rights now. If you want me out, you'll have to evict me properly, which could take months." The smugness on his face. The absolute certainty that he'd found some brilliant loophole. He even mentioned that he'd been documenting his stay with dated selfies and keeping copies of the mail he'd been receiving. "I've done my research, James. You can't just kick me out anymore." That's when I realized this wasn't desperation or temporary circumstances. This was calculated, premeditated. He'd been planning this from day one, thinking he could manipulate the system and secure free housing indefinitely. Well, Michael made 3 critical errors in his master plan. First, he assumed I was the same pushover I'd been in childhood. Second, he thought I wouldn't have the stomach for family conflict. Third, and most importantly, he didn't know that I'd spent the last 2 years serving on the board of my HOA, dealing with similar situations, and had become very well versed in property law. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply said, "Okay, Michael. If you want to play legal games, we'll play legal games." The confusion on his face was priceless. He expected anger, maybe some empty threats about calling Mom and Dad. Instead, I walked upstairs and began making calls. My first call was to my attorney, David, who specializes in real estate law. Despite it being after hours, he picked up immediately. We'd become friends through the HOA battles. I explained the situation, and he actually laughed. "Your brother is an idiot," he said bluntly. "He's not a tenant, he's a guest who has overstayed his welcome. The mail and the changed lock actually work against him. They could be considered trespassing and property damage." David walked me through my options. Since no lease existed, no rent had been paid, and I'd never agreed to any tenancy, Michael was simply a guest. The 30-day residency rule he was banking on didn't apply the way he thought it did. More importantly, changing my lock without permission was criminal property damage. My second call was to the police non-emergency line. I explained that I had a trespasser in my basement who had changed my locks without permission. They said they'd send someone over within the hour. While waiting, I prepared. I printed out every text message between us, clearly showing he'd asked to crash for a few days. I gathered my property deed, mortgage statements, and utility bills, all in my name alone. I also took photos of the changed lock and documented the unauthorized modifications he'd made to the basement. The two officers who arrived were thoroughly professional. Officer Thompson, the senior one, listened to both our stories. Michael tried his spiel about established residency and tenant rights. He showed his dated selfies and mail. He was confident, even condescending, explaining to the officers how the law worked. Officer Thompson then asked the key question, "Sir, do you have a lease agreement?" "Well, no, but have you paid any rent?" "That's not relevant to. Did the homeowner give you permission to change the locks?" Michael's confidence started cracking. "I have rights. I've been here over 30 days. He's my brother. This is a family matter." Officer Thompson turned to me. "Sir, do you want this individual removed from your property?" "Yes, officer. He was a guest who was supposed to stay a few days. He's overstayed his welcome and damaged my property by changing my locks without permission." The officers informed Michael that while they couldn't immediately remove him due to the complexity of the situation, changing the locks was indeed property damage. They gave him two options: leave voluntarily tonight, or they'd file a report that could lead to criminal charges. Michael, suddenly less cocky, stammered about needing time to find a place. The officers made it clear he could take that time, but any criminal mischief would result in immediate arrest. They suggested he not push his luck. After the police left, Michael retreated to the basement, probably to Google frantically about his options. I used that time to implement phase 2 of my response. David had already prepared an official notice to quit, not an eviction notice, but a formal demand that a guest leave the premises. Since Michael wasn't a tenant, the typical eviction process didn't apply, but David wanted everything documented properly. The next morning, I had the notice professionally served. The process server knocked on the basement door at 7 a.m. Michael, still in his boxers, was handed the official documents giving him 72 hours to vacate or face criminal trespassing charges. The look of shock on his face as he realized I'd hired an actual process server was worth every penny of the $75 fee. But I wasn't done. If Michael wanted to play house in my basement, he could do it without my utilities. I called my utility companies and explained the situation. Since everything was in my name and I was the sole owner, I had every right to modify service to my property. Within 24 hours, I'd had the electrical breaker to the basement locked, the gas line to the basement heater shut off, and the water to the basement bathroom discontinued. Michael came storming upstairs that evening, his phone flashlight providing the only illumination. "You can't do this. This is illegal. Landlords can't shut off utilities." I was ready for this. "You're absolutely right, Michael. Landlords can't shut off utilities to tenants. Good thing you're not a tenant. You made that very clear when you said you'd established squatters' rights. Squatters don't get utilities. Besides, I'm not shutting them off. I'm simply declining to provide free utilities to a trespasser." He threatened to call the cops. I encouraged him to do so. He threatened to call our parents. I handed him my phone. He threatened to sue me. I gave him David's business card and said my attorney would love to discuss the criminal trespassing charges and property damage. That's where we stand now. It's been 36 hours since the notice was served. Michael is still in the basement, but I can hear him moving around, packing things. He's been going to the gas station to use their bathroom and charging his phone in his car. Our parents have called me 15 times, but I haven't answered. I know Michael's given them his sob story version. Tomorrow is day 3, the deadline. David has already prepared the criminal trespassing complaint if needed. The locksmith is scheduled to come rekey the basement door once Michael leaves. I've also installed security cameras covering all entrances, just in case he tries to return. I know some of you will think I'm being too harsh on family. But here's the thing. Michael didn't make a mistake or fall on hard times. He deliberately tried to steal my property through manipulation of laws he didn't fully understand. He was counting on family bonds to protect him from consequences. Well, he learned that family bonds don't override property rights and criminal law. I'll update you all once the 72-hour deadline passes. Whether he leaves voluntarily or in handcuffs, Michael is done living rent-free in my basement. Update 1, Day 4. Holy shit, the last 24 hours have been absolutely insane. I knew posting here would get some attention, but I didn't expect the story to blow up like it did. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice. To those saying I'm heartless, you've clearly never dealt with a manipulative family member who sees you as nothing more than a resource to exploit. So, the 72-hour deadline came and went yesterday at 7 a.m. At 6:45 a.m., I was sitting in my kitchen with my laptop, security camera feeds pulled up, coffee in hand, waiting. David was on standby, and I had the police non-emergency number ready to dial. At 6:58 a.m., the basement door opened. Michael emerged with his duffel bags, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. No shower, no shave, wearing the same clothes from when the utilities were shut off. He stopped at the top of the stairs and stared at me through the kitchen window. I thought he might try to come in for some dramatic confrontation, but he just stood there for a solid minute before loading his stuff into his beat-up Honda Civic. But here's where it gets interesting. As he was about to drive away, another car pulled up, our parents. Mom got out first, Dad following slowly behind. Michael immediately ran to Mom, and I could see him gesturing wildly, pointing at the house, clearly painting himself as the victim. I knew this was coming. I'd been dodging their calls for 3 days, but I couldn't avoid them showing up in person. I stepped outside, phone recording in my pocket, single-party consent state, perfectly legal. Mom started immediately. "James, how could you do this to your brother? He's family. He's homeless because of you." I stayed calm. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad. Michael's homeless because he tried to steal my house through fraudulent means." "Steal? Don't be dramatic. He just needed a place to stay." "Then why did he change my locks? Why did he try to claim squatters' rights? Why did he tell me I'd have to formally evict him?" Dad finally spoke up. "Boys have disagreements. You didn't need to involve the police." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screenshots of Michael's texts to his friend Brandon. "Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this part. After the police visit, Michael had been stupid enough to use my Wi-Fi, before I changed the password, to message his buddies about his brilliant plan to secure free housing for at least 6 months while the eviction processed. He'd literally written, "James is such a pushover, he'll cave when Mom gets involved." Watching my parents read those messages was like watching the stages of grief in real time. Denial, "This must be out of context." Anger, "You shouldn't be showing us his private messages." Bargaining, "Maybe he was just joking around." Depression, the silence. And finally, a weird form of acceptance where they turned on me anyway. "Regardless," Mom said, "you could have handled this differently. Where's he supposed to go?" "That's not my problem, Mom. He's a 33-year-old man who thought he could con his way into free housing. Maybe stop enabling him and he'll figure his life out." That's when Michael lost it. "Con. I'm your fucking brother. I needed help, and you treated me like a criminal." "You are a criminal, Michael. You damaged my property and attempted fraud. The only reason you're not in handcuffs is because I gave you the option to leave voluntarily." He took a step toward me, fists clenched. Dad grabbed his arm. "Michael, don't make this worse." "Worse? How could it be worse? He ruined my life." I laughed. Actually laughed. "I ruined your life. You showed up with a premeditated plan to steal my property. You changed my locks. You tried to manipulate tenant law. All I did was protect what's mine." Mom tried one more guilt trip. "James, if you don't help him, he'll have to live in his car." Then maybe he should have thought about that before trying to scam his own brother. "And by the way, where were you two when I was working 60-hour weeks to afford this house? Oh right, you were giving Michael money and making excuses for why he couldn't hold a job." That hit a nerve. Dad's face went red. "We've always tried to help both our sons." "No, Dad. You've enabled one and expected the other to fend for himself." "Well, congratulations. I learned to fend for myself really well. Including from family members who think they're entitled to what I've earned." They left after that, Michael peeling out dramatically, parents following in their Camry. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 hours later, I got a call from my Uncle Christopher, my dad's brother. Then my cousin Jennifer. Then my grandmother. Michael and my parents had started a family-wide campaign, spreading their version of events. James kicked his own brother onto the streets. James chose property over family. James has changed since making money. So I did something they didn't expect. I created a family group email, all 47 members of our extended family, and laid out everything. The screenshots of Michael's texts about his brilliant plan. The photos of the changed locks. The police report. The process server documentation. Everything. I wrote, "Since Michael and our parents have decided to make this a family matter, here are the facts. Michael attempted to fraudulently claim squatters' rights in my home. He changed my locks without permission. He bragged to friends about manipulating tenant law to secure free housing. He counted on family pressure to let him succeed. I protected my property through legal means. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to discuss. But I will not apologize for refusing to be a victim of fraud, family or not." The responses were mixed but enlightening. Uncle Christopher called me directly. Good for you. Michael's been pulling this shit for years. Someone needed to stand up to him. Grandma was disappointed but admitted Michael had it coming. Several cousins shared their own stories of Michael borrowing money that was never repaid or crashing at their places and refusing to leave. But the best response came from my cousin Sarah, an attorney in California. For what it's worth, you handled this textbook perfectly. Clean documentation, proper legal channels, no vigilante justice. Michael's lucky you're his brother, a stranger would have pressed charges. As of now, it's been 18 hours since Michael left. I've had the locks rekeyed, $150, installed a complete security system, $500, and filed a restraining order. David's handling it pro bono because he's fascinated by the audacity of the situation. The basement is already listed on rental sites, and I've got 3 viewings scheduled for this weekend. Michael, from what I've heard through the family grapevine, is staying with our parents. They're apparently making him sleep on the couch instead of the guest room, their small way of showing disapproval while still enabling him. He's already posted on Facebook about family betrayal and choosing money over blood, but most of the comments aren't going his way. The best part? This morning I got a text from an unknown number. It was Michael's ex-girlfriend, Jennifer, the one who kicked him out. She'd heard about what happened through mutual friends. Her message: he tried the same thing with me. Changed my apartment locks while I was at work. I was too scared to do anything about it. Thank you for standing up to him. Maybe he'll finally learn. I'm sitting here now, in my house, drinking coffee in peace. The basement is quiet. My door's locked with keys only I have. And somewhere across town, my 33-year-old brother is hopefully realizing that his actions have consequences. Update 2, 2 weeks later. I thought I was done updating, but the last 2 weeks have been a masterclass in watching someone's manipulation tactics completely backfire. Grab your popcorn, because Michael's attempts at revenge have been spectacularly unsuccessful. First, let me address the restraining order situation. David filed it the day after Michael left, but it was initially denied. The judge felt that since Michael had vacated voluntarily and hadn't made any direct threats, a restraining order wasn't warranted yet. However, the judge did issue a formal no trespass order specific to my property, which is documented with the local police. If Michael steps foot on my property, it's immediate arrest. This half-victory emboldened Michael. He thought if the restraining order was denied, he could pressure me through other means. He was wrong. His first attempt was through social media. He created a lengthy Facebook post about toxic family members and capitalism destroying family bonds. He didn't name me directly, but it was obvious. What he didn't expect was for our cousin Sarah, the attorney, to comment with a link to the state's fraud statutes, highlighting the specific laws about false representation for financial gain. She added, "Interesting read for anyone dealing with family members who think they're entitled to others' property." The post was deleted within an hour. His second attempt was financial. He tried to claim I owed him money for improvements he'd made to the basement. He actually sent me an invoice for $3,200, itemizing things like deep cleaning, organization systems, and aesthetic enhancements. I forwarded it to David, who sent back a formal response stating that any unauthorized modifications to my property could result in a lawsuit for damages. We also included an itemized bill for the lock replacement, utility usage during his stay, and the legal fees I'd incurred, totaling $4,100. He didn't pursue that avenue further. But the third attempt is where things got really interesting. Last Monday, I came home to find a city code enforcement officer at my door. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint about illegal rental activity and unsafe living conditions in my basement. The officer needed to inspect the premises. I gladly let him in. The basement was immaculate. I'd hired professional cleaners after Michael left. It was also completely up to code, with proper egress windows, smoke detectors, and permits for the finished space, all done by the previous owner, fully documented. The officer found absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, he complimented the space and asked if it was still available to rent. Here's where Michael fucked up. The complaint specifically mentioned issues that only someone who'd lived in the basement would know about, like a loose outlet cover behind the water heater and inadequate ventilation in the storage closet. The officer said anonymous complaints that are this specific and turn out to be false often come from disgruntled former occupants. He made a note in the file that this appeared to be a vindictive false report. I also learned something interesting from the officer. Filing false code complaints is a misdemeanor in our city, punishable by up to $500 in fines and 30 days in jail. If a pattern of harassment is established, it becomes a more serious offense. He suggested I document everything and file a police report if any more suspicious complaints arise. Meanwhile, the family drama continued. My Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, called me out of the blue. She's always been the black sheep of the family, moved away years ago, minimal contact. She'd heard about the situation through the family grapevine and wanted to share something. Your brother tried this shit with me 5 years ago, she said. Showed up for a weekend visit, then wouldn't leave. Started talking about tenant rights after 2 weeks. I had to threaten to call the cops before he finally left. Your mom begged me not to make a big deal about it, said Michael was going through a tough time. I've kept my distance from all of them since. This was news to me. I asked if she'd be willing to write a statement about her experience. She agreed immediately and sent me a detailed email about Michael's pattern of behavior. She also mentioned that he'd done similar things to our Uncle Paul and a second cousin in Texas. The family just kept quiet about it to keep the peace. I started reaching out to other family members privately. The stories poured in. Michael had been pulling versions of this scam for over a decade. Small loans never repaid. Extended visits that required force to end. Borrowed cars that were returned damaged. Everyone had a story, but nobody had ever compared notes before. I compiled everything into a document, the Michael file, and sent it to my parents with a simple message: "This is who you've been enabling." The response was swift. Dad called me immediately, his voice shaking. We didn't know it was this extensive." "Yes, you did," I replied. "You just chose to ignore it. Every time someone complained, you made excuses. Every time he faced consequences, you bailed him out. You created this monster." There was a long silence before he said, "Your mother wants to kick him out." "But you won't," I predicted. "No," he admitted. "But we've told him he has 30 days to find a job and his own place. We mean it this time." "Sure they do. Here's the twist, though. Remember the rental listing I posted? I found the perfect tenants, a young couple, Thomas and Emily, both nurses at the local hospital. Stable income, excellent references, and they loved the separate entrance for their shift work. They signed a 1-year lease at $800 per month, which covers nearly half my mortgage. I posted a photo on Instagram of me handing over the keys to them, captioning it, "Turning a negative into a positive. Welcome to your new home, Thomas and Emily." Petty, maybe. Satisfying, absolutely. Michael saw it, of course. According to my cousin who still follows him, he went on a rant about me profiting off family misfortune. Several people pointed out that it was my property to do with as I pleased, and that he'd tried to steal it. He blocked them all. But the absolute best part happened yesterday. I got a call from Brandon, Michael's friend who he'd been texting about his brilliant plan. Brandon wanted to apologize. Apparently, Michael had tried to pull the same scam on him last week, showed up for a few days, started receiving mail, talked about his rights. Brandon, having seen what happened with me, immediately kicked him out and threatened to call the cops. "I thought he was joking when he told me about his plan with you," Brandon said. "I realize now he's seriously disturbed. Thanks for standing up to him. You probably saved a lot of people from getting scammed." As of today, Michael is still at our parents' house. He's reportedly applied to a few jobs but keeps finding reasons why they're not the right fit. Mom and Dad's 30-day deadline is approaching, but I'm not holding my breath. They've made similar ultimatums before. What's different this time is that Michael's running out of options. The family knows his game. His friends are wary. He's gained a reputation as someone to avoid. The free ride is ending, not because he's changed, but because people are finally comparing notes and protecting themselves. Final update, 2 months later. I wasn't going to update again, but what happened over the last month needs to be shared. It's a perfect example of how enabling parents and a manipulative adult child finally reach their breaking point. Michael's 30-day deadline at our parents' house came and went without him leaving. Shocking, I know. But what happened next was something I didn't see coming. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Dad at 11 p.m. His voice was different, tired, defeated, but also somehow resolved. "James, I need your help. Not for Michael. For your mother and me." It turned out that Michael had escalated his behavior at their house. He'd stolen checks from Mom's purse and forged one for $1,200. When confronted, he claimed it was an advance on his inheritance, and that they owed him for a lifetime of emotional trauma. He'd also been selling items from their house on Facebook Marketplace. Dad's tools, Mom's jewelry, anything not nailed down. But the final straw was when they caught him trying to add himself to their bank account online. He'd used their personal information to call the bank, pretending to be Dad, attempting to add himself as an authorized user. The bank's fraud department caught it and called Dad directly. "We want him out," Dad said. But we're scared. He's become aggressive. Threatening. Your mother hasn't slept in days. I told them to pack a bag and come to my house immediately. They could stay in the newly rented basement. My tenants had just given notice due to a job relocation. Perfect timing. While they drove over, I called David. David outlined a plan. Since Michael had committed check fraud and identity theft, criminal charges were absolutely warranted. This would give my parents grounds for an immediate restraining order and would likely result in Michael's arrest. It was harsh, but it was necessary. My parents arrived at midnight, looking older than I'd ever seen them. Mom had been crying. Dad's hands were shaking. These were two people who'd spent 33 years making excuses for their son, finally faced with the monster they'd created. The next morning, we went to the police station together. My parents filed a report for check fraud, identity theft, and theft of property. The detective, a no-nonsense woman named Officer Chen, took their statement and looked at the evidence. The forged check, the bank's fraud report, photos of items Michael had sold online. This is actually quite serious, she said. The check fraud alone is a felony given the amount. The identity theft adds federal charges. Has he done this before? That's when I pulled out the Michael file. Officer Chen's eyes widened as she read through years of similar behavior. This establishes a clear pattern. We'll be issuing a warrant today. My parents also filed for an emergency restraining order, which was granted immediately given the evidence of financial crimes and the pattern of escalation. Michael would have to stay at least 500 feet away from them and their property. Michael was arrested 2 days later at a bar downtown. He'd been using Mom's credit card to buy rounds for strangers, trying to play the big shot. When the police showed up, he apparently made a scene, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that his family was setting him up. Nobody bought it. He called me from jail. I don't know why I answered. Curiosity, maybe. James, you've got to help me. This is insane. I'm your brother. Michael, you committed fraud against our parents. You stole from them. You tried to access their bank accounts. What did you think would happen? It's not fraud. I'm their son. I'm entitled to. You're entitled to nothing. You're 33 years old. You've spent your entire adult life taking from others. It's over. This is your fault, he screamed. If you'd just let me stay, none of this would have happened. No, Michael. If you hadn't tried to steal my house, you wouldn't have moved on to stealing from Mom and Dad. This is all on you. He hung up. Michael spent a week in jail before making bail, not from our parents, but from some online girlfriend he'd been catfishing. She put up $5,000 believing he was a successful entrepreneur wrongly accused. That relationship lasted exactly as long as it took for her to Google his name and find the arrest record. The legal process moved surprisingly fast. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of federal charges for identity theft, Michael's court-appointed attorney advised him to take a plea deal. He pled guilty to 1 count of felony fraud and 1 count of misdemeanor theft. The sentence, 2 years probation, mandatory therapy, $1,200 restitution to our parents, and 200 hours of community service. But here's the beautiful irony. As a condition of his probation, he has to maintain stable employment and housing. No couch surfing, no temporary stays with family or friends. He has to provide his probation officer with proof of a lease and pay stubs every month. For the first time in his adult life, Michael has to be genuinely self-sufficient. Last I heard, he's working at a warehouse and living in a studio apartment on the outskirts of town. He's not allowed to contact me or our parents. His social media has gone dark. The family members who used to feel sorry for him now use him as a cautionary tale for their own kids about what happens when you never grow up. My parents are still staying with me, though they're looking for a smaller apartment now. They've put their house on the market, too many bad memories, and they want to downsize anyway. Our relationship has improved dramatically. Mom apologized for years of enabling Michael and expecting me to just deal with it. We failed both of you, she said last week over dinner. We failed Michael by never letting him face consequences, and we failed you by making you feel like his behavior was normal. Dad's been going to therapy to deal with the guilt and anger. He told me yesterday that the therapist helped him realize that helping someone avoid consequences isn't love, it's sabotage disguised as support. The extended family has been surprisingly supportive. Aunt Linda visited last month and thanked me for being the one to finally stand up to Michael. You didn't just protect your house, she said. You broke the cycle. Even some of Michael's former friends have reached out to thank me. Brandon started a group chat for people Michael had scammed over the years. Last count, there were 15 members, with stolen amounts totaling over $20,000. They're considering a civil lawsuit, though most just want to move on. As for my basement, I've got new tenants moving in next week, a retired couple who love the quiet neighborhood. They're paying $850 per month, and they've already signed a 2-year lease. The background check was spotless, references glowing, and they haven't mentioned squatters' rights once. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned that family bonds don't mean accepting abuse. That enabling someone isn't helping them. That sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their actions. But most importantly, I've learned that standing up for yourself isn't cruel or heartless, it's necessary. Michael spent 33 years believing he could manipulate his way through life because nobody ever said no. Well, I said no. The courts said no. And finally, even our parents said no. To those dealing with similar situations, here's my advice. Document everything. Use legal channels. Don't let guilt override your rights. And remember, family members who truly love you won't try to steal from you, manipulate you, or treat your hard-earned property as their personal safety net. Michael's story isn't over. He's got 2 years of probation to get through, and knowing him, he'll probably violate it somehow. But that's not my problem anymore. It's not my parents' problem. It's his problem, as it always should have been. My house is peaceful now. My locks work with my keys. My basement generates income instead of drama. And somewhere across town, my brother is finally learning what the rest of us figured out years ago, that being an adult means paying your own way, following the law, and accepting that nobody owes you anything just for existing. Family helps family, Mom used to say. But family doesn't mean being a victim. Sometimes, the most helpful thing you can do is show someone that their actions have consequences, even if, especially if, they're family. Epilogue. Lessons learned. It's been exactly 2 months since this all started, and I wanted to share some final thoughts and practical advice for anyone dealing with similar situations. First, the legal preparation was crucial. Having David on speed dial, understanding property law, and knowing my rights made all the difference. Michael was counting on my ignorance and emotional manipulation. When those failed, he had nothing. Second, documentation is everything. Every text, every email, every photo became evidence. The security cameras, the dated photos of the changed locks, the screenshots of his bragging, they all painted a picture that was impossible to dispute. Third, family pressure is real but survivable. Yes, some family members still think I was too harsh. But most have come around, especially after Michael's arrest. More importantly, I can sleep at night knowing I did the right thing. Fourth, enabling isn't love. My parents thought they were helping Michael by constantly bailing him out. Instead, they created a 33-year-old man incapable of basic adulting. The real tragedy isn't that Michael got arrested, it's that it took 33 years for him to face real consequences. Finally, your peace of mind is worth more than keeping toxic family members happy. My house is my sanctuary. I worked for it, I pay for it, and I decide who lives in it. That's not selfish, that's healthy boundaries. To Michael, if you're reading this and knowing you, you probably are. I don't hate you. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm disappointed that you chose to view your family as marks instead of support. I hope probation teaches you what 33 years of enabling couldn't. And I hope someday you understand that what I did wasn't cruel, it was the wake-up call you desperately needed. To everyone else dealing with a Michael in their life, you're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Family doesn't mean accepting abuse, manipulation, or theft. Stand your ground, use the legal system, and don't let anyone, family or otherwise, make you feel guilty for protecting what's yours. The basement is quiet now. The drama is over. And for the first time in months, I'm genuinely at peace in my own home. That's worth more than all the family approval in the world.